Robert Tannahill was probably Paisley's most famous poet. He was born in 1774, but tragically died at the young age of 35 after committing suicide. His bust is one of 18 in the Hall of Heroes at the Wallace Monument near Stirling, and a carving of his head can be found on the Scott Monument on Princes Street, Edinburgh. Tannahill wrote Thou Bonny Wood of Craigielee. This tune was later modified to form the music for the Australian song Waltzing Matilda. When people write about Robert Tannahill, they always say the same things. He suffered from depression, he burnt all of his manuscripts, and he committed suicide by drowning in the Candren Burn. I wondered, did he really commit suicide? This tragic event took place 210 years ago, and I wondered how accurate the investigation was, so I decided to investigate the last 24 hours of Robert Tannahill. In 1807, Tannahill sold 900 copies of his first work in just 2 weeks. For the second edition, he contacted a publisher in Greenock, but his work was rejected. He then contacted a publisher in Edinburgh, and his work was returned unopened. He took this very badly, but in actual fact the truth was the publisher in Edinburgh had already reached their schedule for the remainder of the year. On the morning of Thursday, the 17th of May, 1810, the body of Robert Tannahill was found in a culvert under the Glasgow, Paisley and Johnson Canal. It was said that he committed suicide because of his character and mental health at the time, and because his jacket and silver pocket watch were found at the scene of the tragedy. He left no suicide note, there were no witnesses, so I decided to look into this a little more closely. This is called Tannahill's Cottage, located in Queen Street in the west end of Paisley. His family moved here just after his birth. You can see the location of the canal just 600 feet away where the trees are in the distance. This will give you an idea of what the Glasgow, Paisley and Johnson Canal looked like. 1 month after the canal opened, there was a tragedy in the area. A day tripper boat overturned, drowning 84 people. Most of the victims were sadly children, but a few adults drowned as well. The canal was no stranger to death. It wasn't uncommon for people to fall into the canal and drown. Some would have been under the influence of alcohol, staggering, losing their balance and falling in, but not all. In July 1853, for example, 4 drownings were reported along that stretch of canal. This was only newsworthy because, along with 2 women and an infant drowning, the 4th victim was Tannahill's nephew, Thomas. Was the depth of the canal, assuming it had been filled with water, considered not deep enough for a suicide attempt? The canal could have been deep enough to commit suicide. It's been written that Tannahill was just 5 foot 4 inches tall. 3 days prior to his death, Tannahill travelled into Glasgow and visited the Union Bank, where he withdrew £20. Now that doesn't sound much, but in today's spending power, that's the equivalent of around about £1,100. In today's consumer society, it's easy to spend £1,000. You could buy a new phone, you could buy some designer gear, but in 1810 that was a lot harder to do, and there's no record as to what he did with the money. One day before his death, Tannahill visited a friend in Glasgow. Realising something was wrong, Alexander Borland walked Tannahill back to Paisley, a distance of over 7 miles. Tannahill tried to give Borland the slip around Crookston Road, but failed. It's been said that he said to him, "Farewell, we shall never meet again." This may be the truth, or it might just be narrative licence. Borland saw Tannahill enter his cottage safely, so he turned around and returned back to Glasgow. Later that evening, his 2 brothers, James and Matthew, came to see if he was okay. His mother checked and he was asleep in his bed. His mother was woken, perhaps by a barking dog, around 3 a.m. She checked to see if Robert was okay and discovered he was missing. His window was open, so he had left the cottage this way as to not disturb his mother by opening the front door. A search party was set up, and a night watchman patrolling the area said he had seen a man matching Tannahill's description walking towards the canal. By 8 a.m. that morning, the news of Tannahill's death had spread across the town. There used to be a towpath on this side of the canal. It was used by horses to pull barges along the canal route. Some people went east into Paisley and some people went west. This cycle path follows the route of the canal. The canal operators lost money from day one, and it was bought by a railway company. The canal was later filled in and a railway line laid along the route. Today it is a cycle path. About 1/4 of a mile along the towpath, his jacket was seen on the opposite bank of the canal. His body was retrieved from the Candren Burn by an African man named Peter Burnett. With the canal so close to home, why did he walk to Candren Burn? The canal was open for business 5 months after Tannahill's death. Would he have witnessed its construction? Would it have been filled with water in time? If so, it's been written that the water was just 4.5 feet deep. I think it was deeper. This location was called Tannahill's Hole up until the 1960s, and the nearby bridge was called Tannahill's Bridge. These names seem to have been lost when Green Road was built in the 1960s. This is the location of Tannahill's Hole. 210 years ago, Candren Burn here was actually open air. The water would fall into a hole, into a culvert underneath the canal, where the water would then continue on its way. It's hard to see because of the undergrowth, but there is a bridge here. It used to be called Tannahill's Bridge, and he walked along the towpath here, over the canal, over to where Tannahill's Hole is now, and that's where he met his end. There are a few things which I'm thinking about. Firstly, the £20 which he withdrew from the Union Bank in Glasgow. Keeping in mind it had a purchasing power of £1,100 in today's money, what did he do with it? There was no record of him spending it in any way. What happened to that money? Why did Tannahill walk 1/4 of a mile along the towpath along this canal to commit suicide at this point when he didn't know how deep this culvert would be, and yet he would have known how deep the water was in the canal near his home? If a man was going to drown himself, why did he take his jacket off, fold it up, put it on the grass and put his silver pocket watch on top before committing suicide? Why did he bring his watch with him? Robert Tannahill left no suicide note. If it wasn't suicide, what could it have been? I had thought, being in May, he might have gone for a walk, was warm, sat down by the edge of the canal, took his jacket off. That would have been okay if it was the middle of the day, but it was the middle of the night. The drowning took place at midnight, plus or minus a couple of hours, so that's out of the question. Then I thought maybe he was attacked and the body thrown into the culvert. But then why would the jacket be taken off, folded up, and his pocket watch placed on top? So it looks as if it was probably suicide, but there are still a number of questions to be answered. Tannahill's funeral took place here, the West Relief Church, on the 21st of May 1810. This church is now being converted into luxury flats. The custom was at the time for suicide victims to be buried in unmarked graves. In 1866, a granite monument was erected, paid for by public subscription. It marked the growing recognition of the poet's work. This is Tannahill's Bridge. There's no acknowledgement that Robert Tannahill met his end here in 1810. Do you think there should be a commemorative plaque? If so, please leave a comment below. Anything which has been raised in this video, please comment, because after all, YouTube is a form of social media. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you next time.